Okay, now that we have looked at a practical example with ChatGPT, let's go ahead and break down the rules framework that you can use when you are prompt engineering moving forward. The reason I like the rules framework is because it starts with the first component of role, so it's easy to remember. For the role, we are assigning a clear perspective. I want the perspective of the CFO, an analyst, a treasurer. Be very clear in that. And then it's going to align the tone, judgment, and priorities that we're looking for in our response. Ultimately, it's going to reduce generic responses or misaligned responses when we get that feedback from the model. Now, we have to be clear with the objective that we're looking to solve. We're going to state exactly what we want the model to do. The more specific and precise, the better. By focusing on just a single output and a clear goal, you're going to get the answers that you need. And also, it keeps you just grounded in terms of not over-explaining or drifting off topic when you're getting results from the model. Now, the limits are a key component of any model that you use in prompt engineering. You're telling the model what to do and, more importantly, what not to do. So you're defining those boundaries, such as the length of the response, the tone, and anything that you want excluded. It helps control the length of the response. As we saw earlier, I was looking for 5 sentences. Maybe you're looking for 5 bullet points, 5 paragraphs. If you're specific enough, that will be included in the output from the model. Ultimately, it's going to drive consistency in the outputs that you receive from the model. So in terms of expectations, this is where you're defining the structure, the level of detail, and to the extent that you have it available, sharing with the model what good looks like. So giving it a framework of this is an example answer that I'm looking for is going to help. Perhaps you're looking for the model to give you some variance analysis based upon the data that you've provided it. Well, if you're able to provide the variance analysis from the prior month or prior quarter, it can use that as a reference for what you're looking for as it performs the analysis for the most current period of time. Ultimately, it's going to reduce any rework. We talked earlier about, having to prompt the system multiple times. That's just part of, working with a large language model. But the more refined your expectations are up front, the fewer iterations you should expect to go through. And then style, not to be confused with role, because it is different. The style really controls the voice, the language level, and the audience fit. So who are you presenting this answer to? And it's going to ensure that the output that you receive matches how you're going to use it. So not just through the lens of a CFO, but who are you delivering this to? Does it need to be ready for a board presentation? That sort of thing. And ultimately, it makes sure that your responses are easier to consume and then act upon by whoever you're sharing them with. Now, there are other frameworks for you to consider. The roles framework is just one of many that you can lean on. There's CoStar, and CoStar stands for context, objective, style, tone, audience, and response. So you'll see that it's similar to the roles framework. In my opinion, it's a bit harder to remember. There is CRISP, which stands for context, request, input, steps, and parameters. So again, it's the same theme. I have just found success in using the roles framework to get the outputs that I'm looking for. And again, it's just easy to remember versus some of these other options out there. In my opinion, the roles framework really maps well to how finance and treasury teams think about our structured communication when we're sending emails, when we're preparing presentations. And with that, I want to share a quote that has really stuck with me as I've been thinking about building out this program. So this quote comes from Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. And Sundar said that AI is probably the most important thing humanity has ever worked on, and that he thinks of it as something more profound than electricity or fire. Now, that's quite the statement from Sundar. I think it's fair to say you can't leverage AI without electricity, right? But I think the point that he's trying to make here is that we are truly in a transformational time for humanity. And with that, it's time for finance and treasury professionals to truly embrace it. One great way to get started is by improving your engagement with large language models through better prompt engineering and learning from the mistakes of others, which we're going to cover now. So before we jump into some of the specific examples of common mistakes that we're seeing, I want you to remember that most errors come from a lack of specificity and a lack of context that we are giving the models versus an issue with the large language model itself. It's really not the lack of the model's capability, it's the lack of specificity and context that it needs in order to produce quality outputs. And that kind of ties into the first example here of being too generic. If you're not giving the model anything specific, it doesn't really understand how deep it needs to go, what it needs to focus on, or the purpose of the response it needs to give. You're going to get back a broad kind of textbook style response from the model. And as we heard earlier, it's going to increase the chance that the answer is just wrong or really just misses the mark. Now, especially in finance and treasury, if you're not providing that numerical context, such as analyze this profit and loss, you're going to force the model to assume, what the scale is, the time period, what the priorities are for that financial data. You're going to get vague insights instead of data-driven conclusions. Numbers ultimately anchor reasoning and improve the accuracy in the outputs you're going to get from the model. Another common mistake is just overloading the tool with a single prompt. So if you don't have any boundaries, you're just kind of putting everything out there, you're going to get a messy output. If you give it too many tasks for attention, it's going to struggle to process all of those at once. And what you end up with is really just a shallow response, trying to cover each point versus an in-depth response that you're looking for. Now, if you're not specifying a persona or audience, we talked about the role and the style in the roles framework. If you're not specifying that, then the output that you get might be, factually correct, but it's not in the format that, you need in order to present to your end users. The outputs can be too technical or too simplistic, so you need to strike the right balance. Now, if you ignore limits completely, you don't provide any constraints, then the model is going to fill any gaps with guesses or approximations based upon probability. That's going to lead to hallucinations, wrong answers, and even longer outputs that just have incorrect information. By having those clear limits in place, you're going to reduce speculation within the model and keep your answers grounded in the truth. And then finally, not specifying the format. The responses that you get from the model, as we saw earlier, are going to vary in structure if you don't provide it any context around the format that you're looking for. And if you don't provide that format context, it's going to be harder to reuse and compare results. If you're very rigid and structured with the format that you're looking for, you can get similar results time and time again that are really useful for comparison. So now what we're going to do is look at some examples of prompts you can use right away. I told you we were going to make this program very practical. And in addition, I have created a set of 10 prompts that you can download, in a single document and start using today. And that will be available at the end of this course. Let's go ahead and preview some of these use cases now. So the first prompt relates to performing a trend analysis and reviewing the associated drivers. So this may be something more akin to something that the FP&A team would perform within an organization. So what we want to do is avoid, hours of manual analysis, creating trend lines, looking at max and min scenarios. And what we want is a short summary that highlights what actually matters to our CFO. So let's break down this kind of wordy prompt that we have on screen into the different components where we utilized the roles framework. So the role is pretty clear. We want this to be analyzed in the role of a CFO. I do recommend specifying the industry because that could vary, depending upon if you're working with a software company versus a manufacturing versus a biotech. You will get a slightly different CFO analyzing that data. In terms of the objective, we are looking to review the financial statements and analyze quarter-over-quarter revenue and expense trends. Now, the limits that we've given to the model, these are the safeguards that we're putting in place. And here we want to analyze and really focus on the numbers within the PDF attachment that we have provided to the model, and do not go outside of the information in that attachment to make sure that we're getting accurate information in our output. Then as we set expectations, we've confirmed that we want 3 bullet points with the need to reference the numbers and percentages in the file to support them, as well as 2 to 3 recommendations, including examples that the model should consider but not necessarily use. So remember earlier we talked about giving some example information to the model that it can reference. This is what we're doing here. And then finally, the style. Generally speaking, the style is going to be consistent for most of your outputs. You're going to be asking the model for plain and easy to understand language. Although there will be times you want to include more technical jargon, such as when you're using the model to, review a new accounting standard or, a new accounting policy that you're looking to adopt internally, or a revision to an accounting standard. Those sorts of actions that require just some more technical knowledge and understanding, maybe you'll tweak the style to accommodate that. So this is one example. We're going to cover another example now. So this prompt relates to performing a forecast accuracy review. And here we want to help our CFO understand where assumptions are made in the planning process. And this is an analysis that will typically take hours to prepare, to summarize prior to meeting with leadership, all while running the risk of running into errors along the way, just naturally as part of the process. So let's go ahead and break this down, again, tying it to the roles framework that we used to create this prompt. So the role, as before, we want the output to be in the persona of a CFO. Please specify the industry. It will make a difference to the output. In terms of the objective here, we are going to review the forecast versus actuals, and we're going to analyze the differences over the most recent 4 quarters. We've asked it to identify the top 5 opportunities. The limits that we've put in place are important here. We want the model to perform the analysis and focus on the numbers that we've provided in the Excel file that we have attached, and ask the model to request additional inputs if needed in order to provide an accurate output. So that's a great little tip there as well, is you can tell the model, hey, don't make any assumptions. If you have any questions or any gaps, please ask for additional input before proceeding. Now, with our expectations, we were very specific here. We asked for 5 executive level opportunities with a specific area that we want to explore within each of those opportunities. And again, we give some examples for the model to consider to frame its responses. The style here is similar to what we saw before. And as I said, you should be setting very clear expectations for style, and it should be consistent across most of your prompts. So that's all we're going to cover here in terms of prompts that you can start using today. But don't forget, you will be able to download the complete list of prompts at the end of this chapter. All right, so it's time for our hands-on exercise. So before we wrap up chapter 4, I want you all to complete a short hands-on exercise that will reinforce the prompt engineering learning in this chapter. This exercise is going to help you see in real time how prompt wording is going to change the quality of the outputs that you get. Now, the goal here is not to get to, the exact right answer. There really isn't one. but to see how the structure of the prompt improves the results. So what I want you to do is download the sample Excel file and briefly scan through the data. Don't deeply analyze it yet, just note the type of data and information that it contains. Then I want you to attach that to your large language model of choice and produce a vague or minimal prompt, such as analyze this data or summarize this spreadsheet. Intentionally avoid, language around roles or limits or format, and see what you get. Then I want you to improve it. Rewrite the prompt and be clearer and more specific. Don't try and follow a framework yet, just in your own words, be a bit more clear in what you're looking for. Add details, what you want it to focus on, the right level of detail, or the time period you want to analyze the data over. And now I want you to take that same data and rewrite your prompt using the roles model. This is going to be important. Like, the more that you practice using the framework, the more it becomes second nature. So you're going to define the role, the objective, the limits, the expectations, and then the style. Ensure that the prompt clearly states how the output should look and who it's for. And then what I want you to do, once you've kind of gone through that process, compare the outputs. Compare the weak prompt output to the output that you got from the roles-based output. I want you to look at the differences in the clarity, how useful the information is, the accuracy, because you can go back to the source data, and ultimately how consistent is that information. And then what I would love for you to do is to present your findings in a discussion with your team or with a great breakout group internally. Share the importance of prompt engineering. Share what changed the most between the prompts that you used and why. Discuss the roles framework and the elements within it, and those that had the biggest impact on the quality of the output that you got. This exercise will show that better outputs don't come from smarter models, they come from better prompts. So we've covered a lot in Chapter 4. We covered a number of key concepts, all tied to prompting a large language model. We started off by getting a better understanding as to why it's important to use the right phrasing for our prompts, and that prompt quality far exceeds and surpasses prompt length when we're looking for quality of our outputs. We then spent some time looking at the roles framework that you can use to structure your prompts in a consistent manner, and we saw the benefits of doing that earlier within ChatGPT. After that, we looked at some of the common mistakes to avoid when prompting our large language models, and we confirmed that a lack of specificity and context is going to lead to generic or even incorrect results. And then, to make this chapter very practical and ready to support you working with large language models right away, we looked at some examples of prompts you can use today. Now, be sure to save a copy of the prompts you can use document and refer to it next time you're prompting a large language model for support. You can also build upon this. So don't just take this as an artifact to use or stash away. I would love for you to use it as the grounding and then tailor it to meet your specific needs and build that library of prompts over time so that you can reuse and reuse them again, especially as you're getting the outputs that you need from the model. This is really just the starting point for you. So in terms of the next lesson, we're going to be looking at generative AI practical use cases. We're going to be looking at research use cases. We're going to be looking at ideation and content creation use cases. And this isn't just, marketing materials. We're going to be tailoring this to finance and treasury. And you're going to see this includes a lot of data analysis. We're going to be looking at specific coding use cases. You don't have to be, a developer to start leveraging these large language models for code, as you'll see. And then we're going to wrap up by looking at custom GPT use cases. Congratulations, you have successfully completed this module. Thank you again. I will see you in the next chapter.